Well, greetings, everybody. My name is Andrew Isaacs. I am on the faculty of the University of California, Berkeley, and I'd like to welcome you to this very brief introduction to the classes we are preparing for you for the fall. There are two instructors and also two administrators who are joining this webinar. I've been given the first 30 minutes and then another professor, Professor Gregory LaBlanc, will have the second 30 minutes. But let's go ahead and get started. I'll start with a very brief introduction about who I am, and then we'll actually do a very short class on innovation. It's only 30 minutes, it's kind of crazy, but let's go ahead and get started. As I said, my name is Andrew Isaacs. I've been on the faculty at UC Berkeley for 22 years, teaching in the business school and also in the engineering department. I'll say a brief few words about myself. I'm originally from New York City. If you haven't been to New York, this is what it looks like. Actually, it looks a lot like San Francisco and maybe even a little like Shanghai too. From New York, I traveled to the American Midwest for university, and then to Texas to work for NASA, the space agency, and then finally to California, which is where I work now, the University of California. In the American Midwest, I attended the University of Michigan. I'm a scientist by training, and so my original work was in the sciences. In fact, my papers and publications were all chemistry, not business. And I worked on solving chemistry problems in my early career, things like the crystal structure of this material. I was recruited to work at NASA, and I joined the space shuttle team, working at the Space Center in Houston, Texas. This is what the Space Center looks like if you've never seen it, but you probably have seen it, not from the outside, but from the inside. This is Mission Control in Houston, where NASA operates its space flights. Again, I was working as a scientist at that point. From NASA, I specialized on astronaut safety and actually worked on this device, which is to keep astronauts safe while they're on spacewalks. After NASA, I moved to Silicon Valley. And this is what it looks like. This is San Francisco Bay. Berkeley is here on the upper right, the city of San Francisco, just across the bay here. And I've been working in Silicon Valley and teaching at Berkeley now for most of my career since leaving NASA. I joined the faculty at Cal, as I said, 22 years ago. And I have to say, it has been a joy teaching students there. At this point, I've had nearly 10,000 Berkeley students, and hopefully you'll be some of my students as well if you take the class this fall. The business school at Berkeley is a beautiful facility. I hope you'll have the chance to visit it when things open up. This is what it looks like. This is also where Professor LeBlanc teaches as well. Over this period of time, I've worked with many, many companies, Chinese companies and American companies, European companies. Some are famous like Google and Sony, Uber, some of them not that famous. So that's a little bit about me. And at the moment, I'm going to stop sharing that set of slides and start sharing the actual lecture that I would like to give at this time. The topic is how Silicon Valley innovates. So how Silicon Valley innovates. Well, Silicon Valley is kind of become a famous place these days. You know, it is certainly one of the world's top centers for innovation. Maybe in China, we would say that Shenzhen would be similar. It's newer, actually, than Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has been pretty much in the same business of innovation now for around 70 or 80 years. And so I want to share just one or two ideas about that. And to talk about how Silicon Valley innovates, we have to look at a very successful, famous company in order to compare what we do to what traditional companies do. And I've selected the famous automobile manufacturer Honda for comparison. Honda is a fine company, but it's got some problems, as we're going to see. And we're going to compare that company to Zoom. Zoom, as you know, was founded by a Chinese entrepreneur. It is a very powerful company operating in both California, where we are broadcasting from, and China. Probably one of the most innovative companies of the past few years. In fact, I'm just finishing a case study on Zoom. And let's take a look at some data that compares Honda, fine company, with Zoom, a new company in a different business. And let's see what the numbers tell us. Well, if we look at Honda, we can see that Honda was formed in 1948 by Mr. Honda, who had actually worked for Mr. Toyota for 10 years before this. And it took 30 years before the company Honda went public with initial public offering, an IPO. In contrast, Zoom was founded less than 10 years ago, 2011, and went public after only 8 years. Now, in fairness, 30 years was a reasonable period of time for going public long ago. And actually, 8 years between being founded and going public in the case of Zoom is actually a kind of a long time right now. The average is more like about 5 years for companies that do go public. But we want to look at something else. We want to look at the value of these companies because they're both publicly traded and they're both global companies. Honda's current market value, as of yesterday when I prepared these slides, was $47 billion. You don't have to worry too much about what is that in renminbi, but just look at the number, 47 billion. And the number for Zoom is 73 billion. It's a bigger number for a company that only went public 1 year ago. There's more that we want to look at that'll tell us even more about the story of innovation and the difference between traditional companies like Honda and new, not traditional companies like Zoom. And this is the number. I want to take that market value and divide it by the number of people who work there. How many employees? Well, Honda has 200,000 employees or more. And if you divide the value of the company by the number of people who work there, what you discover is that each employee, by doing their job so well at Honda, is creating less than $1 million of value, much less, $0.2 million. At Zoom, it's more than 100 times more value being created by each employee compared with Honda. And that's a shocking difference. Sometimes we think of these older companies as so successful and so fixed and so impossible to defeat. But in fact, many of these famous old companies, Honda's one of them, very typical, is actually creating very little value. The products are fine. There's nothing wrong with the products, but there's not much value there. What we see in comparing two companies, both successful, one old, one new, is that the newer company is succeeding in a way that the older company is not. The older company, in this case Honda, is successful by making perfect products every time and by keeping their customers happy. Zoom, in contrast, is successful by replacing older industries like telecommunications and air travel with high quality video conferencing. Now, there's other companies that do what Zoom does, but Zoom is dedicated to this industry in ways that most of those other companies, Facebook and Google and Microsoft, are not purely dedicated to. So let's go further and explore this a little bit more. I like to say that Silicon Valley only has one trick, and we use that same trick again and again. Here's what it is. We look for large industries that haven't changed much lately, and we replace those industries with new industries that serve the same needs more efficiently. Silicon Valley is not really about technology. Silicon Valley is not really about products. Silicon Valley is about customer happiness and customer satisfaction. And the way that we succeed in Silicon Valley is by looking for industries that haven't changed much lately and replacing those industries completely. The products that we make aren't necessarily better, but they're so different than the products that they are competing against that they change an industry forever. All of you use smartphones, maybe by Apple or others. There's several manufacturers who have successful products now, but it was Apple who created this entire industry of mobile communications. There was nothing like it before. And in doing so, Apple replaced several industries or displaced several industries. Telecommunications is one, consumer electronics is another, and the result is a very different world than the one that existed before the iPhone. Let's look further. One large industry, global industry, that hasn't changed much lately is the car industry. I'm showing here photographs of 6 current models of automobiles. All are famous names: Ford, Nissan, Porsche, BMW. And what you'll notice is they all look exactly the same. Now, the photograph is all the same color car too. I chose white cars. And I also covered the wheels with white circles, because actually the main difference between these automobiles is the shape of the wheels. Let's look at another 6. Toyota, Mercedes, Honda, and Volvo. Again, they look exactly the same. This is what old industries do. They copy each other's products. They try to make the product perfect. They try to compete on quality and price, which is reasonable, but ultimately creates a risk. Here's 5 more examples: Volkswagen, Mazda, Toyota, Audi. Again, they look the same. And then along comes a company called Tesla and introduces a product to compete with these that is absolutely, completely different in appearance, for starters. In addition, it runs on electricity, not gasoline. In addition, you get free electricity in most cases for the lifetime that you own the vehicle. In addition, it has self-driving features that none of these other cars do. In addition, it has onboard devices, including cameras and sensors for safety as well as for convenience, that most of these other companies don't have. The reason I'm showing this is because intentionally, Tesla, which is a Silicon Valley company, has done exactly what Silicon Valley is famous for. We look for large industries that haven't changed much lately, and we replace the entire industry with new industries that serve the same needs, in this case, transportation, but serve it more efficiently and in a completely new way. Here's a close-up of what that vehicle looks like, and it looks completely different than anything that's in the market right now. There's another view. Now, we could say that what these older companies are doing is protecting the past. They're protecting the business they already have. They're protecting the industry that they're in a in a very kind of old style way. Whereas what Zoom and Tesla and other Silicon Valley companies are doing, whether they are in California or China or Europe, what new companies are doing successfully is creating a new future. They're not trying to protect the past. In fact, to be honest, they're trying to destroy the past. They're trying to create a future that's so completely different from the past that older established companies have no way to catch up. I'm going to close with a couple of thoughts about the way companies operate. And I'm going to touch on a topic that the next professor is an expert in. And this topic is artificial intelligence and data analytics. This is a picture of the past. This is an automobile assembly plant. And what you'll notice in this photograph is that very few people are actually working. You'll see this in some factories where, well, you know, people are social animals. We talk to each other. It looks like there's one or two people who are actually working. But still, it's easy for humans to be distracted. And to be honest, using humans to build cars or any manufactured products is a mistake, because humans are not designed well for doing the same task again and again. That's better for robots. And in fact, this is what car factories look like now. They're only machines, very few people. But the people who do work there have much higher skills for programming the robots, for fixing problems, for changing details in how the robots work. The only similarity is that the people were dressed in orange for safety, and the robots are also dressed in orange for safety. Otherwise, nothing is the same. And in fact, this is a direct outcome of the Industrial Revolution that's been going on now for 200 years. The Industrial Revolution, or we would call it the first Industrial Revolution, was the use of machines to replace people doing physical work. And that's exactly what we see. If we go back a slide, here you have people doing physical work. But in the modern world, people aren't good at doing this kind of work. And the salaries aren't very good, to be honest. And in addition to that, it's dangerous. We should be using robots. And of course, that's the direction. But the same thing is happening for office work. Here's a picture of a typical office. Actually, this is in Japan. A typical office in Japan where people are working at desks. But what are they doing? They're looking at data, they're thinking, they're making decisions, they're analyzing data, they're entering data into computer systems. There's a better way to do this. The better way is artificial intelligence and software, because this is what an office should really look like. Just a data center with a few engineers and people using data, collecting data automatically, analyzing those data, and having machines recommend decisions based on those data. This is what I refer to as the second industrial revolution. If the first industrial revolution was the use of machines to replace human labor, then the second industrial revolution is to use machines to replace not physical labor, but to replace what we do with our minds, or supplement what we do with our minds, or augment, add to what we would do with our minds. Other people say there's been 3 or 4 or 5 industrial revolutions. I try to keep it simple, and I say there's really been 2. One that was started about 200 years ago, that was all about using machines to replace physical work, and a second industrial revolution that began pretty recently that replaces what we do with our minds with algorithms. Offices in the future won't look anything like this. This is a terrible environment to work in. It's crowded and boring. And people aren't good at doing repetitive work. It's boring. Nobody wants a job that looks like this. Better jobs, the jobs of the future, in fact, will involve much more data analytics and data processing. I want to thank you for your attention. We have just a couple of minutes left. If there are any questions, Casey or Lauren, perhaps you could let me know.
We did have one question about a third industrial revolution. I think you answered that right around the end, though.
Well, that's right. There are different ways of thinking about this. There is no single definition in terms of third or four. Many people say there's 4 industrial revolutions. To me, that's unnecessarily complex, but different scholars have different ways of thinking about these systems. In my class, we do talk about a third industrial revolution that is just starting now, and it's in biology. It's not about manufacturing or office work at all. It's based on gene modification, a technique developed here at Berkeley about 6 years ago. And it is making dramatic improvements in solving infectious disease problems like the coronavirus, also in helping us understand how we could actually create new species altogether. So there is, in my view, a third industrial revolution that's completely different than the first 2, and it has to do with engineering new forms of life. I'm going to stop sharing at this time and introduce your next instructor. You can see him on your screen, this handsome gentleman who appears to be sitting in a classroom. His name is Professor Gregory LaBlanc. He is a top instructor at the University of California, Berkeley, specializes in more fields than I can remember, but the one that I think he's probably most famous for, maybe the 2 that he's most famous for, is venture capital investing, financial innovation as well, and also data science. And with that, I'm going to give the floor over to you, Professor LaBlanc.
Great, thank you, Drew. That was a great kind of introduction to Silicon Valley and innovation, and it kind of covered some of the key things that I hope to make as points in my very brief session. So the course that I'll be teaching with Berkeley Haas Global Access Program is on FinTech, and the emphasis that we're really going to put within that class is on kind of AI and machine learning, and how machine learning and AI and data science are radically transforming the financial services sector. So just a little bit about myself. Let me get this. I teach it at Berkeley, but I teach it in addition to the business school. I teach in the law school, I teach in the economics department, I teach in the computer science department. I also teach at this school called HEC Paris, which is a European business school. I also teach at Stanford in the economics department and also in the engineering school down there. And I got most of my training at the Wharton School. I guess I could also draw like a little map because I started there in the Northeast and I went down south to these schools in the Southeast and then made my way out west. I'm not quite as smart as Drew because you know, I'd been doing business and economics type stuff my whole life. I started in astrophysics and decided that was not for me, and so I switched to business. These are some of the companies I've worked with. You know, I've worked with a lot of companies in tech and in financial services and manufacturing, and you know, kind of all around the world. Do a lot of stuff. I've done a lot of stuff for Chinese companies and Chinese universities, and Russian companies, Russian universities, and of course, lots of stuff in the Bay Area. And so, you know, I'm talking about FinTech, and when I went to school in Philadelphia, I was studying finance and actually taught a course on financial history right before I left. And this bank here you see on the left, this is a building, right? It looks like a Greek temple. It looks like this very, very profound building, and it's on Broad Street in Philadelphia. And it was founded by the richest man in America, Stephen Girard, back in the 1840s. And if you take a look at this bank and you take a look at the kind of the design of the bank, the architecture of the bank, it's meant to suggest that this bank is not going away, right? This bank is permanent. This bank is solid. This bank is secure. This bank is reliable. If you put your money in this bank, right, it'll be there in 10 years, in 50 years, in 100 years. And this bank, like the Greek temples, will never go away, right? So this one on the right is the bank in San Francisco, and it is also meant to convey solidity and permanence, right? You put your money in there and it is going to be there in 50 years. You go back to the same bank to withdraw it from the bank that you deposited it. Okay, well, there's another entity, another business, another industry that also imagined itself to be permanent, and that's kind of the bookstore business. Right? And if you look at the bookstore here, it also has kind of a similar architecture, and bookstores have been with us for millennia. You know, they had bookstores probably in Athens, you know, in the time of Socrates, right? But if you look very carefully, what do you see? You see a sign that says "Final Days." Why? Because Borders is bankrupt, right? Borders doesn't exist anymore, right? Borders was Amazonified, right? It was crushed. It doesn't exist. I went from spending 8 hours a week in bookstores to 0 hours a week, almost overnight back in the late 90s when Amazon was created. Okay, and if you go back and you take a look at this bank on the left, what you see a luggage cart because this is not a bank anymore. It's a hotel. All right, and so what we're seeing is the disappearance potentially of these traditional financial institutions. And you see a massive amount of investment that's been plowed into FinTech, right? FinTech startups, either through venture investments or through acquisitions, because a lot of the large financial institutions are acquiring these startups. Okay, so you know this is 2018. I could advance it forward, and you see continued increases in investment in FinTechs. You know, I have a friend who started a bank here in San Francisco, and it is growing. It's doubling every 9 months in terms of its size. It's the fastest growing bank in America. And the difference between that bank and a bank like Wells Fargo is that Wells Fargo has about maybe 1% of its employees are software engineers, software developers. Maybe 1% of their employees are data scientists. And you go to this other bank called Chime, right? And about 65 to 70% of their employees are software engineers, software developers. It's a very, very different business. And so when you take a look at a bank like Wells Fargo, right, which is kind of a one-stop shop. You can think of it as an appliance, right, or a superstore, a supercenter for financial services, right? You see that they try to do everything, but every single functionality that Wells Fargo engages in is under attack, right, by these pure play FinTech startups. So whether we're talking about lending, whether we're talking about borrowing, you know, whether we're talking about deposits, whether we're talking about, you know, investments, whether we're talking about retirement, payments, okay, small business lending, it doesn't matter. There are startups that are trying to steal that business from Wells Fargo. And so if you go to Wells Fargo, this is actually a picture that I took myself at Bank of America. It's pre-COVID, but you know, they have these massive buildings. This is in downtown Berkeley, and it's just totally empty. There's no one there. I mean, this is actually a busy day for them. Totally empty. Like, what are they? They're just sitting on all this real estate. And so I like to think that a bank like this, it's kind of like, you know, one of these, you know, wildebeests, right? These big creatures out on the savannah, and they're being, you know, ripped to pieces by the, you know, hyenas who are tearing them apart, limb from limb. Okay. And of course, this process has only accelerated since the advent of coronavirus, right? So we like to say in the digital transformation business where I work and where Professor Isaacs works, that, you know, about 3 years of digital transformation has been compressed into 3 months. And things that people had put off forever and put off for a long time are now happening, whether people like it or not. That fixed cost is being invested by these entities. And so, you know, people want more and more digital banking services, right? So you see a 72% rise in the use of FinTech apps, right, in this short period of time. And digital banking is no longer optional. You don't have a choice in the matter. It's digital or die, right? I've been saying this for years, except that, you know, the death has been long and drawn out. Now it is not long and drawn out. It is fast, right? It is, companies are dying left And right, more companies will probably die of coronavirus than people, right? If current trends continue. So, contactless payments, right? Apple Pay. And believe it or not, for those of you who are in a place like China, it's hard to believe, but in the US, mobile payment was not really a big thing. So in China, I mean, when I go to China, I don't even know what Chinese money looks like, but here in America, we still have to, carry around this green stuff because occasionally we need to use it, primarily for homeless people and so forth. But it's disappearing now. The number one payment app in the U.S. until fairly recently was the Starbucks app. Okay, those days are over as everyone is moving towards Apple Pay and Google Wallet. Okay, so now more than half Americans use contactless payments according to MasterCard poll. And so the World Economic Forum has laid out this nice little convenient wheel of disruption where they go through these 6 different financial sectors and talk about all the different ways they're being changed, right? And so obviously I don't have time in a half hour. If we go take the FinTech course, we'll kind of go through all of these different sectors, right? And I'm just going to talk about deposits and lending, which is the main activity. In fact, it is the definition of a commercial bank. But before I get into banking, I want to go back and talk about a completely different industry. I mean, one of the things about innovation is that innovation is about transfer of knowledge. It's about, right, looking at innovations that happen in one area and then moving them over into another area, right? Noticing what's happening in other industries. Like when people come in from the banking industry and I say, let's talk about Netflix. So what do I want to talk about Netflix for? Like, what does Netflix have to do with banking? Right? Well, Netflix has everything to do with banking, right? Because if you wait until another bank does something and then you copy it, well, then you're already 5 years too late. So you need to look at what's happening outside of your sector. But I want to mention this guy here, Billy Beane. This is a famous person in America. If you're not from America, you probably have no idea who this person is, unless you bought this book or read this movie. And if you haven't read this book or watched this movie, I recommend that you do it. Okay, after this call, go and watch it. You're sitting at home, you got nothing to do, go watch this movie. Because this man who never even went to college and never learned how to code, never learned Excel even, transformed the business of sports and consequently transformed the business of business through a very, very simple change that he made to his business. And that change was, he told everyone in his organization that from now on, and this was a long time ago, he said, from now on, all decisions in our organization need to be supported by data and evidence. Okay, all decisions in our organization have to be supported by data and evidence. And you might be thinking, well, duh, like, of course, what else could you possibly use to support your decisions? Well, pre-Billy Beane, within these organizations, the decision makers would rely primarily on gut. They rely on instinct, they rely on tradition, they rely on, this is the way we have been doing things, right? This is the way everyone else does things. If you think back to Professor Isaac's picture of the car, right? This is what Toyota's doing, this is what we're gonna do, okay? Why? Because we just think it must be the right thing. Our gut tells us it's the right thing. Now, in the area of, right, baseball and sports, these decisions that we're talking about were primarily in the world of HR, and I actually teach courses on HR, okay? And it's about how do you hire people? And so for those of you who follow sports, the most important decision that you have to make for your team is like, who do you put on the team? So these old guys would sit around, they would look at these players and be like, oh, that looks like a good player, and oh, that looks like a bad player, and then have some kind of mental model, and then have some kind of pattern recognition going on in their brain, and this piece of carbon, this carbon-based jelly that's sitting on top of their their neck. Okay, they would use this stuff to try and make these decisions, and then all along Billy Beane came and said, no, we're going to use statistics, we're going to use data, we're going to use analytics. And what he was able to do was to outcompete his competitors. Right? He was able to outperform, right, his competitors. Because before Billy Beane came along, the only way you could win games and hire good players was to essentially outbid your competitors by spending more money. And he came along and said, no, we're going to win without spending money. we're going to use analytics to better spend our rivals. And so what he was doing, I used to work at a hedge fund, and what we would do is we would buy underpriced stocks and sell overpriced stocks using quantitative models. This is exactly what Billy Beane was doing. He was looking for underpriced players, and he would buy them off the street, and then find overpriced players, and then sell them or short them by trading them away, okay? And so this difference here that you see right here, okay, I refer to this as kind of HR alpha, okay? And if you've taken a finance course, you know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, you know, it just means outperformance. And so that's why we talk about Moneyball of media, Moneyball of education, Moneyball of marketing, Moneyball of operations, okay, Moneyball of logistics, and now, of course, Moneyball of finance. And so look, it's very simple, and we will go into this in a little bit of detail in the FinTech class, but it's very simple what you're doing here. It's just basic, very, very basic statistics that Billy Beane was doing and his team was doing. And all he was doing was organizing his historical data into rows and columns, right? And if you understand rows and columns, you understand spreadsheets, and you understand data science, okay? And all you have to do is gather up some what we call training data and organize this training data so that every row corresponds to an individual and every column refers to a feature of those individuals. So in this case, right, in Billy Beane's case, the rows are baseball players and the columns are various features or attributes of those baseball players. And then the final column or target feature is like, were they good? Were they not so good? Okay. In banking, lending, and borrowing, you know, the rows are the individual customers that you have in your database, and then the columns are the attributes of those customers. And those attributes could be, you know, number of loans, how much money you borrowed, what's your income, okay, you know, are you a homeowner? And then the final feature is, did you default on your loans or not? Okay, and if I have enough data accumulated about borrowers and I know who defaulted and who didn't default, then I can do pattern recognition. But I don't do the pattern recognition with the carbon-based processing. I do it with silicon-based processing, and that's always going to be, right, more accurate, okay, in general, okay? And so what I like to say is that data science boils down to two things, what we call training, what we call scoring. So if we want to have a credit scoring model, we need to have training data, and the more training data you plug into this model, the more accurate your scoring model is going to be. Okay, and there's a bunch of different algorithms, whether we call them decision trees, logistic regression, they're all doing the same thing. They're basically classifying our prospective customers into buckets. One bucket says, you know, lend to these people, and the other bucket says, don't lend to these people. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to do a bunch of case studies in the FinTech class, and you know, one of my favorites has to do with this bank called Signet Bank. So I love to survey, you know, whether it's business executives, and I teach the same exact stuff to business executives that I teach to folks in the BGAP class, right? I don't care. You could be in high school, you can be in college, you can be in grad school, you can be a CEO, right? You all need to know the same stuff, right? You all need to learn the same stuff, right? We're in a world where yesterday's knowledge is obsolete. And so if you're a CEO, even if you have a PhD in something, you still need to learn what's happening in the world today. So I point to this example, this bank, Signet Bank. This was the 300th largest bank in the United States, the 300th largest bank in the United States. Now, how do you go from the 300th largest bank in the United States to the largest credit card issuer in the entire world? How do you do this? Number 300 to number 1, boom. The way you do it is with machine learning. The way you do it is with data science. The way you do it is with analytics. Okay, so what they did is they looked around and they saw, just like Tesla looked at all those car companies, and they saw every single bank in the country is using exactly the same scoring model. Every single bank is saying, if your credit score is above this cutoff, you get a loan, and if you're below this cutoff, you don't get a loan. And they said, there's gotta be a more fine-grained model. There's gotta be a way to go into that pile of people who are rejected and find a few of them who might turn out to be good customers. So what they did, of course, the only way to do this, there's only one way to do it, is they wound up lending a whole bunch of money to people who the other model said, don't lend money to. Okay, they went into these piles of so-called bad credits, and they loaned them a bunch of money. Now, what do you suppose happened? What happened was there were a lot of defaults. Okay, a lot of people didn't repay their loans. I mean, there was a reason why they were generally considered bad credits. However, after like 7 or 8 months, they were able to determine that a small percentage of them were good credits. So after 7 or 8 months, after losing a ton of money and having Wall Street freak out and having these CEOs barely cling to their jobs because they were losing so much money, they ended the experiment. They canceled the credit cards of most of the customers. And what were they left with? A couple good customers, an amazing proprietary database, right? They had some training data, which they could then feed through an algorithm. And that algorithm would say, here is what makes these good customers similar to one another. And here is what makes these bad customers similar to one another. So if you want to find good credit risks, go look for people that look like this. Okay? And that's how they were able to scale and grow and become the largest credit card issuer in the world. It's very simple. It's not that complicated. Okay, and so this is what's given rise to lots and lots of new startups in just the borrowing and lending space. Okay, and all of them are using different types of machine learning models to identify good credit risks. So they don't have these loan officers sitting around going, oh, man, it looks like good credit risk over there. What, it looks like a pretty bad credit risk over there. More, it kind of looks like the guy I put money to last year. No, that type of human processing based on anecdote, based on gut, based on intuition is being replaced by, right, models that can be supported by good quality data. So you probably heard about these things called peer-to-peer lenders. Okay, they're not really peer-to-peer. They use institutional money. You know, in the FinTech class, we'll hear from some people who work at these peer-to-peer lending companies. Okay, and what they really should be called are algorithmic lenders. Algorithmic lenders. And what they're doing is they're using data that the other banks don't use. Okay, they're going beyond the traditional data sets and finding signals of creditworthiness that the traditional banks don't look at. Okay, what could that be? Well, one thing they could look at is something like your location data, right? That's not in your typical credit score, your location data. So friends, this is just one day in my life, just one day in my life, typical day in my life, right? I leave work in the morning and you see, you know, I go to the office and I grab some stuff and I head out, you see work, Haas School of Business. There I am. Okay, so I leave in the morning and I drive down. Oh, wow, look at this. I encounter some traffic. And so I kind of like made a little loop around. Now, already, if a bank is tracking my location, they know something about me. They know that I don't like traffic and I'm using Waze and I go around the traffic, okay? Then you see that I spent a couple hours at LinkedIn headquarters, all right? So there I'm at LinkedIn headquarters, spent a couple hours in there, okay? Then I head over to Google headquarters and I'm over there for a couple hours, have lunch, etc. And then I hit Facebook headquarters, you know, for a couple hours in the afternoon. Now already, right, you know a lot about me, okay? And you could probably use this information to either revise my credit score up or down just based on this. Okay? I mean, I think that, you know, I would look at that and I would say, my gut tells me that's probably a good credit risk, but the data might say something different, okay? Maybe this person is just going into the parking lot and, you know, breaking into cars. I don't know. But if we actually drill down into the location data, we can figure out who this person is meeting with, what room are they inside the Facebook headquarters, right? What building are they in? Are they in building 18? Are they in building 6? Right? Where are they? And who are they sitting next to at that meeting, right? We can get that information if we're like a Facebook, if we're Google, okay? Now, then you see this person make a little detour over to the K&L wine merchants. Whoa, wait a second. I don't know. Is that good or bad for credit? I'm not so sure. I don't know. But they spend some time in there. And then this person continues up the road and spends 3.5 hours in the War Memorial Opera House. Okay. Is that a good credit signal or a bad credit signal? I don't know. I've been collecting data on lots of people and I've been tracking them. Okay. And I have the results of their repayment history. Then this information could be like a gold mine. All right. And so there are banks, there are companies, a company called Tal that's based out of Santa Monica here in California. They work in countries like Kenya, where people have no documentation, right? They have no banking history, they have no income history, no employment history, no housing history, and yet they can still lend money to these people because they just download the app and the app scours their phone for data. Like, what apps do you have on your phone? Who are your contacts, right? Who are you texting all day? What are you doing all day? Are you standing in the same spot every day? You going to bars? Okay. Are you going to sporting events? Like, what are you doing? All this information is being broadcast by your phone to anybody who has access. So you grant these permissions and boom, now all of a sudden you have, right, credit. One of the things you probably heard of this guy named Kai-Fu Lee, okay, famous Chinese VC. This guy was visiting here at Haas about 2 years ago, and he was talking about a startup that he had invested in. And this startup was a FinTech, and they were using alternative data to evaluate credit. And he said that one of the most important signals that they had discovered, right, of creditworthiness was how people managed their battery life, right? Because if you have access to their phone, you can actually track this. And he said that people who let their battery go all the way down to zero, these people typically are bad credit risks compared to those that start topping off their batteries at like 20, 30%. Okay, so that's pretty amazing, right? That this is something that no one ever had any hypothesis about. There weren't social scientists, you know, writing articles on, you know, the relationship between your personality and, you know, your battery usage, whatever. This is the kind of stuff that just popped out of the data. So in the world of data, we have what's called hypothesis-driven inquiry, which is kind of the scientific method. Okay, that's what most of us learn in school. And then we have what's called data-driven discovery, which is, you know, you just collect enough data and you just look for patterns and hope that they emerge. Okay, so I actually worked with a startup a couple of years ago, and it was an HR startup, and it was basically, you know, recruiting people and using software to figure out who makes for good recruits. And the thing that we discovered was that the thing that showed up in the data, which was pretty amazing, was the browser that you use when you apply for the job is more informative than virtually anything else on your application. Hey, I mean, this is crazy. Like, if you open up Chrome to apply for the job, you're probably going to get the job because the model says you're a good employee. And if you open up your Internet Explorer to apply for the job, the model will probably reject you because it says that you're going to be a bad employee. It's amazing. Like, no one had any idea. This was not in anybody's theory. This was not something that anybody had thought about, and yet it turned out to be highly, highly predictive. Okay? Okay. So I'm going to skip some of these other examples, right? And I just want to, you know, conclude with this one insight, which is, I talked about the Oakland A's and how they were able to outcompete their rivals by using data science, analytics, and so forth. The problem is that although that might have been a competitive advantage for them back in when it was first being utilized, it's not a sustainable competitive advantage, because as soon as the other teams recognize what they're doing, they just copy them. And now the other team has money and analytics, and all the Oakland team had was analytics. And so even though it's absolutely essential and absolutely critical that every single company use analytics and use machine learning and use data science, that alone cannot provide you with a competitive advantage, because at the end of the day, that is a commodity. Like, anybody can learn how to do this, and anybody can hire away anybody else who knows how to do this. And so at the end of the day, in today's world, your competitive advantage has to come from your data. Can't come from what you do with the data or how you use the data. It has to be from your data. And so I would argue that if you don't have a unique proprietary data source, you don't have a sustainable competitive advantage, and you'll ultimately be commodified. And so the only way to understand all these business models that are succeeding in the world today is because they are developing proprietary data streams. Okay, so we can look at a company like a Zoom and say great user interface, great network effects. Okay, network effects is another really important thing. At the end of the day, right, what kind of data are they collecting that will prevent others from doing what they do as well as they do what they do? Okay, and so that's why more and more business models are built on data capture. Okay, so I'll skip some of these examples and just show you that this is having profound impact on employment. Okay, so if you were a bond trader in 2008, you had a lot of work. If you're a bond trader in 2016, you have nothing to do because you've been replaced by a robot. And as Professor Isaac said, look, the robots aren't taking over the construction jobs. They're taking over the jobs of lawyers, bankers, doctors, accountants, professors, right? Anybody who is making decisions using data, which is what you typically go to university to learn how to do, your skill set is obsolete. Your skill set has a half-life of about 6 months. Okay, and so if you're not continually retooling, you're in trouble. A lot of us go to university, we think we're going to learn some stuff in 4 years, we're going to amortize it over 40 years. It's not how it works. Okay, you've got to learn how to learn, just like these machines are learning how to learn, and they're learning how to learn faster than you're learning how to learn. So you've got to learn a different type of learning than what the machines are learning. And so I'll just end with this last example because I want to converge it back around what Professor Isaacs was saying. For years, I've been following the automotive space. It's a fascinating space. And of course, we all know that cars are all going to be self-driving at some point. They're all going to be electric at some point. And so there's a lot of companies competing in this space. And so there's a company called Google, a little old company called Google, that's been in this business. They have a subsidiary called Waymo, okay? Or it's a subsidiary of Alphabet, okay? And so they have these little cars, and if you come to Berkeley at some point, you'll see these little cars driving around in Mountain View, no driver. And then there's this other little company called Tesla, okay? And they have these nice little cars, okay? And so I've been asking this question for at least 6 years in all my classes as a quiz. And I say, listen, based on everything you've just learned about data science in the last 20 minutes, and everything I said about what constitutes a competitive advantage, which of these companies do you think is going to win? Which of these companies do you think is going to win? Okay, and it's amazing. Only recently did people start getting the right answer. I would ask people for years, and almost everybody, whether you're from Silicon Valley or not from Silicon Valley, you would say Google, of course. Because Google has better data scientists, and Google has better, analytics teams, and Google has better, cloud architecture, and Google has, better everything. The only problem is, as I just said, all of that stuff is commodified. What matters is data. And when you look at these, and this is 2016, this is a 4-year-old slide, right? I've been using the same slide for 4 years. If you look at the amount of miles that Google has racked up on their little self-driving cars, over the entire history of Waymo, Tesla gets more miles before lunch every day than Waymo has accumulated in its entire history. And so the answer is obvious to me. The answer has always been obvious to me, and that is Tesla, right? Tesla's going to win. Tesla's already won, okay? So you may have heard this quote. I'm sure you'll hear it in my class. You'll hear it in Professor Isaac's class. You'll hear it in every class probably you take at Berkeley. You'll hear this quote from Mark Andreessen, who's a famous venture capitalist now and founder earlier in his life. He said, software is eating the world. And what this means is that every single company out there it has to be a software company. If you're not a software company, you're a dead company. That's all there is to it. I mean, I remember I talked to these executives from Mercedes-Benz. They're like, they looked under the hood of a Tesla and they looked at the chassis and the struts and all that stuff. And they said, oh man, we were doing this stuff 30 years ago. This is just a little toy car. I was like, you guys don't get it. Like, you don't get it. You think that by putting a little bit of software into your hardware that you can compete. You can't. Okay. Tesla is not hardware with software in it. It's software with hardware wrapped around it. Okay. It's a software company. Okay. And if you're not a software company, you're a dead company. That's all there is to it. There's only two kinds of companies. All right. Business people still haven't, there's so many business people that still haven't figured this out. And they're just hoping that they can get to retirement before they have to figure it out. But I would also like to amend this and say, you know, Mark Andreessen's only half right, because I would say every company has to be a data company. Data is eating the world. And if your core competency, your resources and capabilities are not fundamentally wrapped around a core set of proprietary data streams, then you will ultimately go out of business. Okay, so that just kind of gives you a little bit of a teaser for the FinTech class. And obviously, as you can see, we're going to kind of bring in stuff from all sorts of other industries to help understand what's happening in this financial services space. You know, I said my training was, you know, started off in finance and used to teach all the core finance classes here at Haas, and that's why they brought me in. And then, you know, very quickly shifted to teaching strategy classes and data science classes, digital transformation classes, and, you know, HR classes and all sorts of other stuff. And so we'll have a chance to really, you know, talk about all sorts of kinds of aspects of business in the class. And so I hope to see you there. I hope you can join us. Really is a lot of fun. We also do some, you know, cool site visits virtually, which will be fun. And I guess at this point, in our 1 minute left, do we have any questions from the audience, Casey or Lauren?
I don't see any questions yet, but maybe in the next couple seconds, there may be some to come in.
Okay.
But as of right now, there are no questions.
Okay.
You had some admirers of the library behind you, so.
Well, this is my office, so, you know, it's, this is not a fake library. I do have, right? I do have some fake libraries that I could call up if you want me to. All right, I have. Let's see, I have some fake libraries. I have this. This is actually from Dublin. It's Trinity College in Dublin. This is actually a Harvard library. This is a library in Mexico. So, you know, I like my libraries.
Do you happen to have the Berkeley library?
No, I don't. I'm working on it.
Oh, no.
But I have the Berkeley. I have this is Chew Hall. Okay. And this is, you know, the classroom in which, you know, I do most of my my classes when we are in person. So that's it. I need more Berkeley backgrounds. Also got, I should also get some other countries. This is
Greg, we have one question here.
Yeah.
It says, hey, Professor, thank you for this class. If you still have some time left, could you share with us some more examples about alternative credit models?
Yes, I can. If that's all right with you, I can give you one other example that I had in my slide deck here. Let's see, I'm still sharing screen, right? Okay, so this is one that I thought was super cool. And this was based on the fact that social media allows you to understand people's personalities in a very, very fine detail. Actually, let me skip that example. I'll give you this example. This is a company called Prosper. It's a peer-to-peer lender that's been operating here in the US for the last 10 years or so. And, you know, what they do is they give applicants just this little box, the free-form entry box, and you can write anything you want. You can write like, please lend me money because, hey, you know, I need money, right? I'm a good person. I just have a jam. I got a medical problem. Please just, you know, give me some money. So you can write anything you want. And originally, when it was peer-to-peer, people would look at that and they would read it and try to figure out, hey, is this person a good person or a bad person? And so they have like 10 years of data and they have 10 years of, you know, repayment history. And so they're able to tell exactly what words. They use a thing called naive Bayes. It's a very simple data science technique that you can learn in about 15 minutes. And they go through all the data and they found which words correlate with higher repayment. So which of these words correlate with higher repayment? Can anybody guess which of these words correlate with higher repayment? Let's see, let me get the slide back. Where is it? Anybody want to take a look at these words? What do you think? Which of these words correlate with higher repayment? See if anybody has anything in the chat. Can anybody guess? Okay, well, all right, no one's gonna guess, I'll tell you. These words, okay? And so what that means is that if someone writes in their little box, thank you so much, I promise I will pay you after I get out of the hospital, so help me God, like that person's not going to repay you. Right? So the thing about it is that only Prosper has this database because they're the only ones that have been asking this question for the last 10 years. And so this gives them a leg up. And if anybody wants to come in and try to copy the Prosper model, they can't, because they would need to access that database, or they have to start asking that question themselves. And if they start asking that question themselves, then they're going to wait 10 years before they can catch up to where Prosper is. Okay. So anyway, I've got lots and lots of different examples like this. One of my students who is from Korea, she came to the US and she couldn't get a credit card because her credit history was, didn't exist in America. So she thought, well, that's kind of crazy. I paid my tuition in cash and I still can't get a credit card. So she started a credit card company. She's a Haas MBA, Haas undergrad. She started a credit card company last year, and now she's up and running, and she's got thousands of credit cards out there, and she just got funding, and she's 12 million post money, and a couple of Haas professors are on her board, including myself, and it's doing great. So if you see a problem and you can identify a potential way of solving the problem, and you can get in there first and start using data to improve the product, then you can get funding and you can grow, get more funding and grow, go public, get acquired. And those are the sorts of things that I think, Professor Isaacs will be talking about in his class as well, is, how do you do this? How do you identify the opportunity? How do you exploit it? And I'm going to focus on, how the role of data in this. I'm also going to focus on, specifically in the financial services sector. Okay.
So I just wanted to say thank you everyone for coming. My name is Lauren. I am an advisor for the Berkeley Haas Global Access Program. And I just want to say thank you to Professor Greg LaBlanc and also Professor Andrew Isaacs. We learned so much today. And I hope that this really helps everyone to kind of understand what our program is really about. We're excited to get you excited about these programs. I'm adding here to the chat our website, and Casey also added our email address. So make sure to check out our website. And the application is listed here on the website. The deadline for the application is August 11th. All right, so I hope to see you all soon. And thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, everybody.